Hi everyone, today we are going to talk about workers' rights in the BRIC countries. That's Brazil, Russia, India and China. This information comes from the US State Department 2023 Human Rights Report, and we focus on the part about workers' rights. Each of us will talk about different points like unions, forced labor, child labor, working conditions, and main problems in each country. The goal is to compare how these countries protect their workers and to see what problem is, like low pay, unsafe jobs, or lack of freedom to organize. Today I am talking about workers' rights in Russia based on the 2023 Human Rights Report. In Russia, workers don't have full freedom to form their own unions. The government controls most unions, so people who try to start independent ones can get in trouble. That means workers can't really protest or fight for better conditions. There are also cases of forced labor, especially in prisons and among immigrant workers. Some people are made to work in bad conditions or have their wage taken away. Child labor is not super common, but it still happens, sometimes in small or informal jobs. When it comes to working conditions, a lot of jobs have low pay and can be unsafe, especially in industries like mining or construction. So, the main problem is that workers in Russia don't have real independence, and the laws that protect them are not well enforced. In short, Russia has worker protection law on paper, but in real life the government's control and weak enforcement make it hard for workers to stand up for their rights.
Thanks, Omar. I will talk about Brazil. In Brazil, workers can form unions, but not everywhere. There is still forced labor in farms and constructions, and child labor in informal jobs. Many people work long hours for a low pace, and laws aren't well enforced. Business must check their suppliers in avoid supporting child for forced labor. Now we'll pass it to Jesus, who will talk about China.
Forced labor in Brazil still exists, especially nowadays in rural and remote areas. You'll find it in farming, cattle ranching, charcoal production, construction, and mining. These industries that rely on manual labor and sometimes exploit vulnerable workers. The government runs rescue operations and has made progress, but due to corruption and lack of enforcement, it continues to happen. In short, forced labor remains a hidden but a serious issue in the Brazilian economy. I'll leave with my partner Jose, who will talk about some other issues in Brazil. Lastly, let's talk about Brazil. Let's see how are the conditions, how is every subject on this country. Let's talk about unions and the worker freedom. In Brazil, workers are legally allowed to form unions, but the freedom to organize is not the same everywhere. Many industries, especially agriculture, mining, and construction, have union systems that are influenced by employers or regional politics. Even when unions exist, they often lack real power to negotiate higher wages or safer conditions for their workers. The biggest issue is that a lot of Brazil's workforce operates in the informal sector, meaning they don't have a legal contract or protection at all. So even though unions' rights look good on paper, often the workers never benefit from this. Lastly, let's talk about the main problem. The main problem issue in China is government control over workers. Freedom of association doesn't really exist and everything is monitored. and activism is often suppressed. As a result, workers depend on state-run channels that rarely prioritize their needs. This control limits transparency and makes it harder to report abuse and allows unfair labor practices to continue behind the scenes without nobody noticing or regulating or imposing any sort of punishment for these practices. Now let's talk about the working conditions. Factory workers in China often face long shifts, more than 12 hours a day, repetitive tasks, intense pressure to meet quotas. Many live in dormitories provided by the factory where privacy is minimal and the rest time is very short. Workplace accidents happen because of poor safety standards and weak inspection systems. Although wages have increased over the years, workers often experience burnout and mental stress due to non-stop production demands. Let's talk about child labor, which is technically banned in China, but it still occurs in rural and poor regions. Children often leave school early to work in small factories, family farms, or local workshops. These cases are very hard to track because they happen in informal or underground settings. So while the government claims there are low numbers, the reality in remote regions tells a different story since these are very poor regions and family that lives in pretty much horrible conditions. Let's continue talking about forced labor. Forced labor is one of the most criticized issues in China, especially in the Xinjiang region, where reports claim that some minorities are being forced to work in factories and farms. Even outside Xinjiang, workers can be pressured into overtime or relocated without even having a choice, pretty much. Particularly in manufacturing hubs, international companies have been warned to check their supply chains to make sure the materials are not linked to forced labor. This has created global tension, with some countries banning imports from these factories connected to these practices from those regions in China. All right, y'all, let's talk about China and let's start about talking about the unions and the worker freedom. China's labor system only allows one official union, the All China Federation of Trade Unions, which is run by the government. That means workers have an independent voice that they cannot perform their own unions or organize protests legally, as in the US. So any negotiation about pay, hours, or safety has to go through a government structure that usually sides with the employer or state interest. This limits the worker freedom and discourages speaking out against unfair treatment.
Thanks, Jesus. I will talk about India. In India, child labor is still common, especially in rural area or small industries. Many jobs don't follow wage or safety laws, and poverty keeps the problem alive. Company workers there should make sure their suppliers follow ethical labor standards. Now, I will give the word back to Omar, who will talk about Russia.
In Brazil, many people work long hours for low pay, especially in farms and construction, even though there are laws for minimum wage and safety. A lot of jobs don't follow them, especially in the informal sector. The main problem is that labor laws are not well enforced. There aren't enough inspectors, so many companies break the rules and workers stay unprotected. So, Brazil has good laws on paper, but in real life, many people still face poor working conditions.